Welcome to Rite Good, the podcast that helps you write good. I'm Raquel S. Benedict, the most dangerous woman in speculative fiction. In contemporary SFF circles, it has become fashionable to dig up H.P. Lovecraft's corpse and put him on trial as the avatar of everything wrong with speculative fiction. Hi, hey, Harley, stop it. While we won't defend Lovecraft's abhorrent social values, he was a huge racist and it was disgusting, we have to ask, what is the point of this? What do we gain by canceling a man who is now a dusty skeleton mouldering in the dirt? Are we really reckoning with SFF's bigoted past, or are we just looking for a way to ignore our contemporary problems by pinning them all on a convenient scapegoat? With me to discuss this is returning guest Karlo Yeager Rodríguez of Podside Picnic.
Hi, I suppose I should let people know. I mean, I'm not sure that any of the regular listeners, don't know this already, but I am going to just say that I have a bone to pick about this idea of somehow, I think I'd phrased it that to a certain extent, the use of post-colonial in SFF circles sounds suspiciously like past colonial, like somehow it's all in the past,
Like it's over, like it's not still an ongoing process.
right?
Which is kind of not what post-colonial in Fanon's work meant,
Yeah,
to the best of my understanding.
we keep on digging up old Howard Phillip and putting him on the stand for yet another cadaver synod, like he's what is it, Pope Formosus or whatever.
Right, that one Pope who got dug up and put on trial. There's some really fucking cool like metal paintings of it.
I
Which
mean,
okay, like H.P. Lovecraft was really fucking racist, and his work was really racist. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not going to defend the horror of Red Hook. But like, what do we gain from this? Like, what is the point of this? What is the point of yet another viral Twitter thread about how H.P. Lovecraft was real bad, y'all? Like, what does this serve?
Strap in, but fuckos. I'm going to tell you about how Howard Phillips Lovecraft was a big bigot. Honestly, I think that part of the thing here is that it's an easy ask, right?
Right.
Everyone knows who Lovecraft is. Everyone knows that Lovecraft was definitely racist.
It's not a secret. It's not debatable.
Like, he has published poetry that is, that whole poem.
He named his cat a racial slur. He was not taking any effort to hide it.
Yeah, exactly. Perhaps he had some slight changes of heart later, but I don't think that you just turn a leaf, a brand new leaf at that point.
It would have been interesting if he'd lived longer to see him going through the process of reckoning with his previous body of work. Like, that would have been super interesting, but we didn't get that because he died.
Yeah, he died of like stomach cancer or some shit.
Yeah.
Just so happens that his later life, as I understand it, it's really sad because he died almost like destitute, like eating like from cans of beans and shit like that. Honestly, just real sort of fucked up shit. Regardless, I do find that it's interesting that it's sort of touted that, and this isn't to defend him, I'm just saying that it's touted that he was more racist than the time period. And
Right.
I look at that and
I know that people at parties would get mad because he'd go on these really fucked up rants. Like, his wife was really embarrassed because she'd take him out and he would just start ranting about skull shapes or whatever. But the question is, was he legitimately more racist than anybody else of the time, or was he just saying the quiet part loud?
Right. And I think that it should be mentioned in case, again, any listeners that don't know this, he did marry once. A raging anti-Semite that he married a Jewish woman who I think his term was that he accepted her because she had, quote, assimilated enough, end quote. And
Right. And just because you're marrying someone of such and such identity doesn't mean that you're not prejudiced against them. I mean, how many misogynist men still date women? Like most of them, probably. Most misogynist men still end up dating or marrying the thing they hate. You know?
you gotta definitely you can't.
Or you do the like, you're one of the good ones. She's one of the good ones. It's okay. You do that weird asterisk thing.
You mentioned that, and speaking of colonialism, so I had that happen to me. Not the dating part. The fact that I was raised in Puerto Rico, a colony of the U.S. Even though in 1953 the colonial status was swept under the rug at the behest of the U.S.
Right.
They asked the UN to let's not pursue that any further. So it's no longer publicly called a colony.
It's a
Uh,
commonwealth now, I believe.
yeah,
Whatever the
it
fuck
is.
that means.
It is neither common nor wealthy. So
No.
I don't know. I don't know what the fuck.
Well, somebody's getting that wealth, but it ain't Puerto Ricans.
What is it? Brock Turner is that fucker. Is it Brock Turner? I forget the Bitcoin dude.
Ugh.
Amongst many others. So anyway, the I think Brock Turner is actually the dude that got the 6 months on a rape charge.
Oh, right.
But that might be another thing.
Yeah.
The reason I went on that tangent is because when I was going to school, I went to a school on a military base because my parents were teachers there and I could go for free. And generally speaking, I was a student alongside enlisted officers' kids, FBI kids, and so on. And invariably there would be some of the more U.S. or Anglo kids that would be like, yeah, but I would comment that they were saying something nasty about some Puerto Rican kid, and I'd say like, but dude, I'm Puerto Rican. He's like, no, you're not really Puerto Rican,
Ooh, fun.
not to me. And you're like, Jesus Christ. See, after a while, you just stop sort of fighting against it because it's like, how do you even
Right.
really engage with that?
Right. Like, this isn't an argument I'm going to win. I'm just going to feel incredibly depressed afterward. It's more trouble than it's worth. You're not going to crack the shell. You're not going to teach them anything.
Right. And that's in I was going to school in the 80s. So,
Yeah.
H.P. Lovecraft was dead for quite a while since then. My point being that even for the time, H.P. Lovecraft was, as you commented, I think he was in line with the ideas of the time.
Let's point out that, I mean, in the, I think, 40s under FDR, or was it the 30s, there was the massive eugenics campaign started that eventually sterilized a third of Puerto Rico's women. This went on to the 1970s. And if you talk to liberals today, the way they talk about Puerto Rican statehood is Puerto Rico exists for us. Puerto Rico exists as a resource to get us another couple of electoral votes so we can win elections. That is how mainland liberals talk about Puerto Rico. They talk about statehood purely in terms of, oh, we'll make Puerto Rico a state. Like, does Puerto Rico want that? Would that be good for Puerto Rico? Do you have a right to just completely absorb this island with its own culture and its different language? Like, they still very clearly, casually have the colonialist mindset. They still very clearly, casually see Puerto Rico as U.S. property,
Yeah.
whether they want it or not. And this is like nice little liberal people too. This isn't even conservatives, but this is still an incredibly fucking racist, white supremacist, colonialist mindset. And it's quite casually expressed by people who are supposed to be in like the nice liberal party.
Right. Like Puerto Rico and Puerto Ricans are not
Right.
for themselves. They don't exist for their own purposes. They exist for our purposes. And
Right.
it's really frustrating to hear that even from people who you'd think are sort of fellow political travelers, because
people who talk about decolonizing their fucking bookshelves will say that.
Yeah.
With zero irony.
Yeah.
And when you point it out, they're just like, or it just refusal to confront it. I know people got so angry at Trump. Sorry, that rustling in the background is my cat playing with a toy very loudly. But people got very angry at Trump for casually joking about, oh, we'll trade Puerto Rico for Greenland or whatever. And it's like, Harley, fucking Settle down, cat. Jesus Christ. And yeah, it's rude, but at the same time, this is saying the quiet part out loud. Like, Puerto Rico is not free. It is U.S. property, whether it wants to be or not. And he's acknowledging it in a crass way, but this is the fucking reality.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but we'll trade it for Greenland versus, oh, we'll make it a state. Like, in essence, that's not different.
Yeah.
At the heart of it is still, this is our property to do with whatever we please.
Well, I mean,
That's what's at the fucking heart of it. Same fucking shit.
yeah, I mean, the funny thing is that I was just reading, I forget if it was a post by Nydia Corfor or China Mieville about the H.P. Lovecraft bust that was used as the World Fantasy Award.
Right.
And let me see if this sounds sort of familiar. When Lovecraft writes that horrible poem or the horror at Red Hook, he's talking about the uncouth and not, quote, polite, end quote, Black people. So, after an entire summer of protests and an entire movement that has apparently stopped being reported too much on,
Right.
I can't help but think that we have not really progressed that much.
No.
And honestly, I feel like, to a certain extent, to your comment regarding, like, the decolonizing your bookshelf there is in fact an essay that says, decolonization is not your metaphor.
Right.
And it's become this little sort of catchphrase that sounds nice, but that's the extent of the decolonization that people, the companies that deal with publishing want, amongst other things. I mean, it's all well and good. I'm not against it, but I feel like it's sort of there to jangle some shiny keys in front of people who think that we're on this upward swing. And more so than any other sort of genre, or perhaps I'm having a selection bias or something like that because I'm in the SFF community.
Right.
I feel like the SFF community definitely has like this teleological fallacy that somehow things are better.
Absolutely.
In the meantime, I've had people that I'm on panels loudly, cry out that, well, don't criticize Star Trek, because all I said was Star Trek has a colonialist framing.
Yeah.
Like, the original pitch for Star Trek is completely colonialist. It is wagon train to the stars. So, I mean, whenever you're evoking,
it's Manifest Destiny.
Yes. And as we've noticed just recently, what is it? The Eternal Frontier? Unlimited Frontier. That's the
Final Frontier, I know, was I mean, that's in the intro.
Yes, but
Space, the final frontier. We are frontiersmen. This idea of the frontier, like that's a colonial.
Oh yeah, for
colonialist idea. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but there is.
It's like this woke colonialism, like Starship Troopers, really.
So,
where the fascist army is like multiracial and gender neutral and stuff. I'm like, that's cool, but they're still like space Nazis. They're just like less racist space Nazis, kind of.
There was just last year, I think they're trying to revive it, the Endless Frontier Act in the U.S. Congress.
Ooh, I don't like that phrase.
Yeah, right. I think that doesn't even, like, I don't even know what to do with that. That's simply, we want to extend colonialism to space.
Right. We want to colonize Mars, and that is the word they use, is colonize. It's not ending.
Yeah, it's really it is a problem that is ongoing, and we have not even dealt with it.
And something I'm going to point out, like the big hope punk story, the Goblin Emperor, right? Let's look at this. The idea is that it's okay because the emperor is mixed race, but it doesn't question the idea of, wait, should we have an emperor? Like, is it okay to have an empire? Can you really have like a woke empire? I'm going to say no, you fucking can't.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot have like an enlightened empire. An empire is based on colonialism. It's based on domination. It's based on exploitation.
Yes.
And even if the guy in charge of it is multiracial, so like that's as far as the critique goes. Like more goblin emperors, more female concentration camp guards. Like that's not decolonizing anything.
We should just start sending pictures of the hyena of Auschwitz as a
Right.
response to more women guards.
There were gay Nazis. It's cool. It's like diverse.
Yeah. I mean, and I think that the issue I have with this sort of very superficial approach to examining colonialism and the racism that sort of undergirds it is the fact that, as with the Goblin Emperor, right? It sounds really nice, but then when you start talking about like what seems to be like these milk toast policies, at least to the metropolis, right? Such as austerity measures or economic sanctions, people think that that's good versus dropping bombs.
Right.
Both of those things, like bombs are definitely much more obviously and apparently weapons of war,
Right.
but austerity and sanctions are equally devastating weapons of war, and I would say more insidious because people don't sort of cotton to the fact that that's a bad thing.
Hmm.
People scratch their heads like, well, why does Iran have such a high COVID rate, of people dying and stuff like that? And he's like,
Right.
well, dummies, we've been imposing sanctions ever since the Obama administration. It's been 8 years.
Right. Like when conservatives hold up, oh, Cuba's poor as an example is why communism can't work. Like, yeah, of course it's poor. And any nation that's under the kind of trade embargo that Cuba's under is going to be poor. There's no fucking way to have the world's biggest economic powerhouse declare war on you and like not be poor.
Right, right.
There's no fucking way. The fact that it still exists at all is pretty astounding.
Oh God, I had a cursed thought. Goblin Emperor 2, Juan Guaido.
Oh no.
God.
But yeah, I mean, we have a lot of people talking about decolonization, but being awfully quiet about the coup in Bolivia, being awfully quiet about Wish.com Tony Stark's whole like, we'll coup anyone we want. Ha ha ha. Fucking comment. Being really quiet about sanctions on Venezuela or making really mealy mouthed statements about Palestine of like, well, we want an end to the violence. Like, which violence? What violence? Like treating the violence of the colonized versus the violence of the colonizer as equivalent.
Well, I mean, that's exactly the issue that we're seeing right now. Gaza versus, like Palestine versus Israel.
Right.
Palestine does not have its own, it cannot control its own passports. It doesn't even have control over its ocean, the stretch of ocean that it
Right.
can, that it has. They have no power, and somehow to equate, sure, Hamas rockets might have killed some people, sure, but to equate that with the multi-billion-dollar weapons of war and the entire machinery backed by the U.S. as somehow equivalent, it's really something. It really is something.
Right.
And then, on top of that, you need to somehow have some sort of weird, sort of literacy test about, the last 3,000 years of history. And it's like, no, that happened within some people's lifetimes. It's not like it's that old. This is pretty simple.
Right. The country is like less than 10 years older than my mother.
Yeah, yeah.
Like that's not that old.
Yeah, and I mean it was entirely a product of. So to maybe get into a little bit of it is the fact that it was entirely the product of colonial interests back in the 19th century. Sort of
Right.
divvying up the Middle East and making an entire shit show out of. These are places that have relationships. These are places that different nations occupy, and by just drawing a line arbitrarily across a forest or a river or whatever doesn't erase those relationships that have existed for a long time, which sounds like I'm contradicting my previous point, but it doesn't, because Palestine existed on its own. Israel was created by, I believe, Western interests to sort of give the Jews a homeland, and also somewhat goaded into it by extremist factions in the area. So I mean, it's not. I may be asking for a canceling for this, but it's not quite as difficult to understand.
Right. Like it is a tool of Western interests. It's not this thing that spontaneously grew up. And you know what? If you're trying to like make up for the Holocaust, give them a chunk of Germany. Fucking give them a piece of Italy. Give them a piece of of like the Axis territory. I think the Chapo guy said like just give them fucking Austria. Austria doesn't need to exist. We could have avoided. You know what? How could you fight back after that? Like, oh, why do you give us? Yeah, okay, fair enough. You'd have to accept it because it's like, you fucked up. This is a fair and just punishment. You lost your land, and instead of a bunch of like fucking IDF thugs, they'd just all be like DJs or something, and it'd be awesome. They'd be really chill.
Yeah, yeah.
It would be lovely.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that you mentioned, or rather, we had talked about John Carter of Mars as an interesting
Right.
example of like this colonialist narrative. I have not read the book, but I just recently, outside of like this is completely coincidental. I saw the movie and I was fascinated, but also taken quite aback at how much of the character of John Carter is supposed to be like this, and like his entire reason for going to Mars and wanting to fight the supposed good fight is essentially, it's that, what is it, the lost cause myth, right, of the Confederacy.
Right.
And because he is a Confederate soldier,
Yeah.
he's a former Confederate soldier that gets zooped off to Mars in a very nice 19 like late 19th century fashion. Is sort of like this weird mishmash of different cultures that somewhat ham-handedly seem to map onto the different types of cultures in the U.S.
Right. Right.
You have the red Martians. Aha.
Subtle.
Yeah, real subtle. The Tharks, which I didn't find the Tharks, which are like green skinned and have 4 arms, but also very strong and warriors. And I was like, these are not indigenous. If I were to, I'm sure.
I mean, it's late 19th century, so it might be like an ethnic stereotype that's outdated. It might be like, oh, it's the Irish or something weird. Like,
Well, I was just thinking along the lines.
it's Slavs, it's Slavic culture. You know how they are.
those wily Slavs. Well, I mean, I was just thinking that because they're very strong and can sort of this is just the stereotype of black people, and they're tribal and blah blah blah. It's amazing, and it's a very strange type of narrative to be releasing in 2012. This is not like it was made 50 years ago.
Right. It's a very recent thing. And oh, good, there's another goddamn siren going past my apartment, and the cat is loudly chewing on plastic. That's good. That's good. God damn it. Sorry, I live close to a hospital, so these things happen. Harley, though, I don't know why you have to bring in loud plastic and crinkle it. I don't know why you have to do that, cat. You are a little jerk who needs attention all the time. Cats are supposed to be aloof, and you're not. No, no. Yeah, and I mean these sort of colonialist attitudes and problematic racial coding. I mean, it's everywhere. We got Lord of the Rings here.
Mhm. I do want to point out that one of the things that is really interesting to me about Lord of the Rings, and this is it's sort of like a weird flattening, right?
Mm.
Because as soon as the movies came out, the orcs looked very different. But by Tolkien's own, I think in his own letters, let me see if I can find the quote here. Yeah, his orcs were much more yellow peril. Not great.
Oh.
They were described as, quote, squat, broad, flat nosed, sallow skinned, with wide mouths and slant eyes.
Oh, great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yuck. Yeah.
But to be honest with you, like, it's weird because after the movies came out, that image became they're black or they're tribal. They're like Maori or indigenous.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. I mean, the way they're portrayed in the movies, which again were pretty recent, is like dark skinned, lots of
Mhm.
tattoos and piercings. Like,
And this is like a Peter Jackson special, right? Because
yeah,
have you ever seen his remake of King Kong?
no.
The natives of Skull Island in King Kong are honestly like just straight up black skinned, and they're portrayed sort of like as a sort of degenerate race.
Ooh.
It's really off putting once you think about it. I enjoyed that movie for what it was, but he did not stop to sort of examine some of the problems with trying to adapt, sort of like a pulpy adventure that sort of deals with a lot of the same sort of colonialist outlooks, back in 2007, I want to say. I might be wrong, but, like almost 2010 or something, it's not too long ago.
So, I mean, as much as we want to say that this stuff's in the past, it's also it's very much in the present and the very recent past. And even if Harley, would you fucking stop it, cat? Jesus. Sorry. Even if, like, you take away the signifiers, the syntax is still there, the structure is still there, the idea of empire and colonialism being good is still there. I think, like, instead of a golden age space opera, which was very overtly sort of colonialist, I feel like we have almost more of a gilded age
Mhm.
space opera, where it's like the structure of the stories today that are really popular, it's really similar. It's still this very like hero with a thousand faces stuff. It's still very much kings and queens, and the structure is still there. It's just like, okay, the hero is diverse, but what does it mean for the hero to be diverse when the structure is still the same?
Well,
And we know what that structure leads to.
yeah, I mean,
That structure in every single instance has always been like some sort of racial supremacy. It has always been very patriarchal. It's just, oh, there's a woman in charge. I bring that up constantly, but Paul Verhoeven Starship Troopers, like that's what we got now.
just this smiling psychopath, like was it Carmen Ibarra or whatever her name is?
Right.
Just flying her little spaceship and bombing from orbit, nuking the bugs from orbit.
Right.
You mentioned the Gilded Age, and I've been really sort of kicking around this idea that a lot of space opera it takes its cues from stories about the Age of Sail, and it adopts this very paternalistic sort of viewpoint, right? That somehow I think the only sort of space opera ish thing that I've read that doesn't necessarily sort of set off my spidey senses in that sense is something like The Left Hand of Darkness, where
Mhm.
the Le Guin is saying that the ecumen is not interested in domination. They're interested in sort of sharing information.
Right.
But even then, I sort of look askance at it because everything else is not that. Every other space opera is not that.
Right.
I mean, even not to harp on Star Trek, but like Star Trek is an Age of Sail narrative, more so in the New Generation,
Mm.
because the important thing here isn't necessarily the inhabitants of the planets that they visit. The more important and who is more centered is the relationships between the ship's officers, and I find it really interesting that in a sort of post-scarcity example of some people call it an example of like
Fully automated, gay, space, luxury, communism.
which I don't think it is.
Mm-mm.
The fact that who's centered in these stories is always the crew of the Enterprise. I understand the reasoning behind it. You have a budget, you can only spend so much. You can't have an anthology show.
Mm.
You need to center on a steady crew of people that you're going to make a show about. And generally speaking, like especially in the Next Generation, there is some grappling with that, but the framing is there. And I'm sorry, they're a supposedly post scarcity organization that is structured like a military, and you're not going to tell me that there's not a little bit of gunboat diplomacy happening. Come on.
Right.
I suppose we should probably move on to one of the things that sort of set this idea off, like this conversation off, which was Shiv Ramdas's essay.
Really bad essay. I'm sorry. This is like college freshman shit.
Yeah, it's not very good. Supernatural or super unnatural, an examination of post-colonial horror. And I'll say right off the bat that to be perhaps as careful and as fair as I can be, I just think that it just misinterprets certain aspects of horror. And it tries to sort of do this by tying it to Lovecraft somehow, to sort of invalidate the idea that horror is this colonialist genre. And
Which, like, Shiv Ramdas talk to a Latino challenge. For the love of Jesus, do you know how many fucking Latinos love horror? Do you know? Do you know? Do you know? Well, just
well, I mean, we just recorded like Quiroga with his horrible tick monster. Come on now.
just Dude, just for the love, for being woke, it shows the startling ignorance of other cultures.
Yeah, I
Very shocking to me. Like, you are, if you know anything about Latin America, how the fuck can you say that, oh, horror is a beloved thing of the colonizer? And there was one statement in there which really was startling to me, which is, only colonizers fear the unknown. Like, are you fucking kidding me? Do you think, okay, to the colonized people, the colonizer was the unknown, and it was pretty fucking scary.
yeah, I mean,
If you read anything, the history of the conquistadors' invasion of Mexico, the Aztecs had prophecies of terrible things coming beforehand. There were their soothsayers had these horrifying prophecies and strange manifestations. There was like a bird with a mirror on its face, and in the mirror it showed darkness, and they knew something horrifying was coming, and then it came. Like, you tell me that's not fear of the unknown?
I would argue that to a certain extent, the statement that really sets me off is the idea that somehow horror is a disruption of the status quo, but that status quo goes in both directions, right? So, like, for instance, as you're saying here, the status quo of the Aztecs was we'll not mince words. It is a very warlike and somewhat bloodthirsty culture that also was always maybe I'm not going to say that. I'd say that they had their foundational myths regarding, the different suns and whatnot, and the idea that you needed human sacrifice specifically, to stave off the coming of the fifth sun, which was the catastrophic one that they were afraid of, sort of speaks to me of like this idea of like a perpetual war, except that it's a perpetual spiritual war, which isn't to, sort of say that the Aztecs were awful. They had their own culture. It definitely wasn't our culture, and they definitely had a stratified society where, certain people were perfectly fine to die at any moment. I would say that to our standards right now, it seems like a brutal culture, but our standards right now sort of sweep under the rug or hide from us the fact that many people in other parts of the world are just basically cast aside or sacrificed for line goes up.
Right.
What difference is that? What exactly is the difference between making the economy, the GDP line go up versus the fifth sun? And that sounds reductive, and it surely is.
Well, in one, some people who aren't me can buy another yacht.
Right.
And that's extremely important for some reason.
Yes.
It's extremely important that someone who isn't me can buy another house.
Exactly. I'm probably going to murder the phrase here, or the quote, but I believe when he was interviewed regarding Atlanta, Donald Glover mentioned something along the lines of, you need to understand that the things that make something about the tax structure, the things that let you in the suburbs have another car in your garage, put people like me in jail. And I mean, I don't know what, that's a great summation of exactly the type of system we live in right now. I will also say that, Shiv's essay does have a lot of assertions. It's very strange because it doesn't really explore too much.
It doesn't explore anything in depth. It just sort of declares this is post-colonial. This is post-colonial in such way, but doesn't really support any of its ideas.
Mm-hmm. Like, I mean,
in any way. It's really, like I said, college freshman before, but it is a very mediocre college freshman essay, and I wouldn't be harping on it if I didn't see it praised so much.
Yeah. I mean,
it's very strange to me to see a bunch of adult writers reading this empty, fluffy little mediocre nothing piece and praising it. There's nothing there.
Yeah. One of the things that sort of really was interesting to me is the fact that he spends like a couple of paragraphs. Like, if you're, the thing that is really interesting to me is that he spends a couple of paragraphs sort of delineating what is out of scope of his essay.
Mm-hmm.
When, I mean, honestly, I would have spent a couple of sentences. And one of the things that he asserts is that there's not a lot of scholarship around the, oral traditions of storytelling and whatnot.
Which is not true.
I don't know outside of...
There's a fair bit of scholarship. It just takes effort to get it.
Yeah. I mean,
and this was not a high effort piece. This was not this was not an essay that required visiting a library and using JSTOR. This was a couple of Google searches, maybe.
I would also say that, like, for instance, personally, I remember, and this may not be the exact same thing that he's talking about, that, I remember, like, in the 90s, there was a bunch of books by Jan Harold Brunvard that he had that sort of collected all these sort of urban legends. And what are urban legends? You know, they are oral. That's an oral tradition.
Right, that's oral tradition. It's modern oral tradition.
Like the vanishing hitchhiker, the choking Doberman.
There was a huge thing about like urban legends too in the 90s. A ton of horror movies were about urban legends. There was that crappy horror movie called Urban Legends, and also Candyman was all about the exploration of urban legends, particularly urban legends in low-income urban Black neighborhoods.
And I mean, I will say this, that a lot of those urban legends, my feeling is that a lot of them are a product of like this end of history, right? The idea that the end of history has come and that somehow there's this growing unease that this is as good as it's going to get. So then you also get interesting sort of series and TV shows that sort of question authority whilst also being part of that authority, like the X-Files, for instance.
Right.
So, it is, I will say that we could probably draw a pretty straight line between that type of idea of like what X-Files and these urban legends are trying to do to current conspiracy theorists and QAnon. And I feel like that's worth examining, not just sort of discarding it and setting it by the wayside because, oh, that's inconvenient to my, to what I want to say. Because I feel like part of the problem also is that there is a process of colonization within the United States of, of sort of subjugating, poor and marginalized communities like people are like right here in South Baltimore. We have I forget if it's one of those trash incinerator plants, and the health results of that trash incinerator plant. Like, okay, so I live out in the county. I may be unbeknownst to me, I may be benefiting from that. But the South Baltimore people, which are probably mostly Black and not quite as wealthy, have all these health issues, asthma, all sorts of lung problems. This is something that's
Environmental racism.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, this is also something that's happening in Puerto Rico, which I've been.
The shelling of Vieques Island.
Well, there's that, but also there is a trash incineration project that that there's been protests about, and it's exactly that. Like, the air is just filled with fucking ash, and people are just just getting all sorts of diseases.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Vieques is a colony of the main island of Puerto Rico in a certain sense. They don't have their own hospital. Like the other day, there was
They have staggering cancer rates.
Oh yeah,
Partly because the USA uses it for target practice for experimental weaponry, and that shit is just floating in the water. So local people have just horrifically high cancer rates, and they have to take a ferry to go get chemotherapy.
Or anything else. Yeah. I mean, they have the Navy left, I believe, in 2011 or 2010.
But that shit's still there.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, the sick joke of it is the fact that they were using depleted uranium rounds in Vieques as sort of like a way to train for like Iraq and other places, right? The local Surgeon General of the island said, "Oh well, no, the cancer rates don't surpass the baseline." And you're like, "Come on, dude, come on, man." Mm-hmm. Like their incredible cancer rates. Like he was trying to say that because of the isolated community and genetics and so on. And you're like, come on, man.
What genes? Oh, Puerto Ricans have better anti-cancer genes. Their skull shapes just deflect cancer. It bounces right off. Their low forehead ridges. Whatever the fuck. Give me a break, dude.
It's truly amazing.
Their genes. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Because of their genes. They can't. What's unbelievable? Just. But that does bring us another aspect of colonialism and imperialism too, which is that shit always comes home.
Mhm.
The horror of colonialism comes back to the heart of the empire slowly, 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 but it comes back. Like a lot of the suppressive methods used abroad end up being used for crowd control, for protests. A whole lot of the techniques that the IDF uses to subjugate Palestinian civilians, a lot of those methods end up being used by American cops.
Yeah.
When dealing with crowd control, when dealing with BLM protests
Right.
a couple of years later.
Well, I mean,
You see it over and over and over again, which is, I guess, another side of colonialism, which oddly enough, I think the decolonize your bookshelf crowd doesn't seem to note that. Like they'll talk about cops as now that it's fashionable, even though all of their biggest heroes are basically super cops, they'll do like, cop bad, cop bad. It's like, okay, well, why cop bad? Why cop bad? Where did he learn to do these things? There's no acknowledgement of that. There's no understanding of that because overall there's a massive lack of intellectual curiosity, I think.
going back real quick to Shiv's essay, because I do have a couple of more points on that. It's
Yeah, I have trouble coming up with points on it because there's like nothing even to talk about. It's just
well, I did want to say that his tying horror to Lovecraft to sort of discredit it as not being post-colonial enough is an interesting, like he's pulling off an interesting thing here, which doesn't really hold up because, like, for instance, one of the more interesting, like fascinating things that Lovecraft does is that he, like Shivs is saying that Lovecraft's idea of horror, because he's going off of Lovecraft's essay on supernatural and horror. I forget the name of the essay right off the bat. He's talking about like status quo, right? And he says that he doesn't really grapple with the idea that Lovecraft's more fascinating thesis throughout a lot of his work actually is that the idea of a status quo is an illusion. Like, we do not have a status quo. What we have is a convenient illusion that we tell ourselves, and then it's just pure chaos bubbling underneath. Like that's the entirety of his thesis regarding like Cthulhu and the mythos and whatnot, is the idea that we think that we are at the top of the food chain or creation or what have you, but that's not true. These alien extraterrestrial ancient semi deities sort of produced us as sort of like an accident, that we're just a joke, and a bad joke at that. And I feel like that is truly a demoralizing and terrifying concept
right.
that is not being engaged with in this essay.
Right. Another concept, another aspect of Lovecraft's work that a lot of the critics don't really engage with is social class. Like these rich old families, they're never the good guys.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Like old aristocrats in Lovecraft, they are always just demonic, inbred monster people. They're horrible. And also Alienation. Leslie Lee III of Struggle Sesh had a really great essay in Blood Knife about Lovecraft Country, and he mentioned this. Nearly all of Lovecraft's protagonists feel isolated from society for a variety of reasons, not unlike the alienation blacks and other marginalized people experience. Alienation is at the heart of the black experience of America. Moreover, Lovecraft was anti-capitalist, and the vast cosmic conspiracy at the heart of Lovecraft's cosmology lends itself to Marxist readings. So there are these aspects of it that they're missing, and they're not recognizing. And I think there are ways to kind of engage with that while acknowledging the really disgusting views in there. Like to just completely dismiss Lovecraft's work as like he was racist, there's nothing worthwhile in there, I think is really faulty. And I think it's notable that Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who we read her book Mexican Gothic, she in there has I think two characters named after H.P. Lovecraft, or at least one, Howard, the super gross old guy named after H.P. Lovecraft, and he's this gross skull-shaped caliper guy. But Sylvia Moreno Garcia is also the publisher of Innsmouth Free Press, and she co-edited two anthologies. One is called Historical Lovecraft and another is called Future Lovecraft. So while she's obviously criticizing him, she did find something compelling in there and is finding, I think, a more thoughtful way to reckon with this.
When you say that, I also always come back to the idea that, one of the things that I feel is what people are fighting against regarding Lovecraft, apart from, like, obviously he's got his definitely bad things, like he's racist and all that stuff, but they're really trying to fight with the idea that a lot of his stories are just in the public domain. So people are invited.
Right.
People who he would sort of pale, go pale with terror writing his stuff, are able to publish and sort of imagine things and sort of remix it in different ways.
Yeah, there's one, I'm reading it right now. It's a short one, a novella by Victor Laval called The Ballad of Black Tom, which takes Lovecraft's, probably his worst work, the horror at Red Hook, and I mean worst not just in terms of racism, but also in terms of just writing. It's really like kind of an incoherent story, I think, and recontextualizes it, and he's turning it into the story of this black hustler who kind of gets involved with the weird, spooky, demonic rich guy's plans just because it's like, look, the world's fucked. I don't.
Mhm.
Oh, this is going to destroy the world? Oh no. I would sure hate to destroy this world that I live in. Gosh, that would be terrible.
You mean all you super rich racist fucks get a taste of your own medicine? Okay.
Oh no, we'll disrupt our current society? What? Oh, that'd be so bad. Would sure hate to see that happen.
I think one of the more damning things in the essay is actually the assertion that the colonized are not able to detach themselves from their everyday existences, and that in fact horror comes from, like, this horror of the status quo being disrupted comes from a place of privilege, which even a cursory glance of the source material that Shiv is referencing, Lovecraft admits it. He says, and here's the quote: "The appeal of the spectrally macabre is generally narrow because it demands from the reader a certain degree of imagination and a capacity for detachment from everyday life. Relatively few are free enough from the spell of the daily routine to respond to rappings from the outside," which sounds like a sly dig at Poe, "and tales of ordinary feelings and events, or of common sentimental distortions of such feelings or events, will always take first place in the taste of the majority." So, I mean, I don't know what. Right there, that entire essay is sort of just taken apart. I'm sorry.
And to the idea that, oh, only the privileged are afraid of a disruption of the status quo, like, I'm sorry, but the oppressed know that shit can get even worse. As bad as stuff is, the status quo, if it changes, it can get even worse. So I don't buy the idea that, like, oh, they fear the disruption of the status quo. Like, okay, but people know that, like, a disruption of it can make things even worse than they are now.
Go ahead and read about the history of Columbus coming to Dominican Republic or Puerto Rico, and how the Taínos' status quo was disrupted by that. Uh, come on now.
Right.
I think you and I have both.
Or the Aztecs. Like, it was a brutal society. I won't deny that. But goddamn, the conquistadors were even worse.
Oh yeah. Well, and before then, like, they just a while back. I don't know about the scholarship and whether the scholarship of this book has been sort of challenged or whatever. But there was a book several years back called 1491, I believe, posits that there were like hundreds of thousands of sort of First Nations people living in North and South America, and that simply the landing of settlers from Europe, the plagues that they brought with them just decimated like entire communities, like just complete devastation. I believe that it's in that book that I came to the realization that, like, that little cutesy Disney movie, Squanto, A Warrior's Tale or whatever.
Right.
Squanto is suffering from severe PTSD and loneliness because he had to bury his entire village.
Right.
And he needed, like, he looked for some sort of companionship. This wasn't like, if he had had his druthers, he would have not been going to any white people. He would have found some of his own people, but they're all dead.
Right. And, like, sadly, I mean, because he was kidnapped and forced to live in Europe for a while, like, that's probably a culture that he's familiar with in this fucked up way. It's a culture that's established that he understands. Like, he spoke English. So it's like, okay, this is a thing I'm kind of used to. All right, cool. Like,
Yeah.
Fuck, that's how bad shit was for the guy.
I don't know, man. It's sort of difficult to really grapple with all of it because, I mean,
It's hard to get into the head of a person who's been through something that fucking bad. Like, nothing in my experience has been on par with something that goddamn bad as what he went through. So I don't know how to get into that mindset because I haven't experienced anything like that. Not to that scale, not even to a fraction of that scale.
it's truly amazing. And again, like, perhaps going back to like the idea of like this internal colonization process that's happening in the US. Like we've mentioned that, once it reaches a certain point outside of the metropolis's borders, it comes back, and it sort of manifests itself in these really weird ways. I know that you and I've talked a lot about Poltergeist, right, the movie, and I didn't really think of it until I came upon this idea that the majority of haunted house narratives, where, speaking of supernatural, sort of something that disrupts the status quo, all of these haunted house stories are sort of based on this need to grapple, like the people there are grappling with, to a certain extent, their inclusion amongst the landowning class. And it's a very bourgeois sort of fear, right? I will give that status quo idea a little bit of weight here in this type of thing, because it's basically, it's at the end of Poltergeist we find out that, spoilers for a
movie that's 40 years old at least.
we find out that they've built an entire housing development on a graveyard. But okay, but whose graves? Like, are these white people's graves? Because is that what the story is about? Because I mean, the entirety, like, if we're being honest with ourselves, like, most of the US is an entire grave.
Right.
It's this idea that somehow what you have gotten, your house, your property, you will have to grapple with what that means, and what how you got that is a really interesting way to look at like the idea of the haunted house narrative. And I feel like, at least in American, I don't know if that's entirely true about
John Carpenter's The Fog was very overtly about that too, like really explicitly about like the people who founded this happy community did some real fucked up shit
right
to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, that's simply the anxiety of having to grapple with your past
Yeah.
coming back, right?
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit more about grappling with that past, because I feel like there is kind of an attempt right now to grapple with our ugly past, and not just as a nation, but also in a genre, and how genre fiction has this history of basically being propaganda for the empire. And there are some different means of grappling with it. One attempt, I think, is to just throw it out and say, I'm not going to read anything old, which to me, I think that's throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because you learn a lot by reading old fiction that's problematic. It's like, I think you learn what our history really was, instead of this like whitewashed history. I would much rather read old problematic works that show the country for the way people actually thought, as disgusting as it was. I would much prefer that to like Hamilton with, multiracial rapping slave owners. Like, what the fuck is that? And I'm going to point out, when conservatives depict the 1950s, they don't talk about Jim Crow.
Yeah.
They don't talk about lobotomization. Okay, like this, what we're doing now with these 80s pastiches, and as fun as 80s pastiches are, the kids in these 80s pastiches are never as homophobic as kids casually were in the 80s,
Mm-hmm.
I do think this whitewashing the past is kind of harmful in a way, because it's a very conservative idea of like, well, why don't we just go back to that? When you watch an 80s movie, you go, oh yeah, that's why we shouldn't go back to that. As much as I love a lot of these movies, it's like, wow, the casual homophobia and racism are not great, and I'm glad that we're not that anymore.
Think about how free the kids in like something like Stranger Things are to just bike around and just go hang out and blah blah blah, and you're like, the Satanic Panic was in like full swing.
There were a couple of missing kids cases that got like really really famous around the time, and of course this was the reason these kids are all so like free range is because their parents are all divorced.
Yeah. Well,
that's another reason that's not quite like grappled with too. Like the kids in ET, their parents are divorced. They're being raised by a single mom. So that's why they have all this free time by themselves. It's because they don't have two parents.
Right. And she's like holding down some sort of job that's never specified. And she's a little frazzled and whatnot. Even in the movie, I think
she's raising 3 kids by herself. That's a lot.
There's also the plain fact that if this were really sort of, instead of being a nostalgia piece, if it was a period piece, Winona Ryder's character in Stranger Things would have been, accused of being some sort of weird pedophile, or having disposed of Will in a
absolutely
secret satanic basement, or
yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Or just simply, told that, she deserves it for getting divorced and being an awful person.
Well, this is what happens when there's not a father around. Your son gets kidnapped by a monster.
Well, I mean, but that's
Obviously.
honestly, that's still a thing that we hear now.
Yeah.
That's not like anything new.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like, to your point, I think that there is a difference between, for all his flaws, like, there's a video essay by now canceled Lindsay Ellis about like how Stephen King, for all his flaws, his book It is really like, it's a fucked up book. I'm not going to deny it.
Yeah, it doesn't make the 50s look good at all. There's no it is just the 50s sound horrible.
I feel like, to a certain extent, I feel like maybe he's got an idea. Like, I often think about, like, how I believe Stephen King was like a Republican until X amount, like until he was X amount of years old. And he probably has people in his own family that he knew that were just awful, but he had to live with them because their family, he lived in the community.
What, rural Maine with reactionary politics? No.
At the very best, you'd get lots of libertarian politics, except for, like places like Portland and whatnot. And even then, somewhat iffy. Did you manage to speaking of Maine, did you manage to see that thread that Dwight Rhinoceros from Eat the Rich?
I didn't manage to.
So he has this entire thread
I'm going to post a link to it.
that is talking about Malaga Island in Maine, which it used to be, at the turn of the century, the 20th century, I should say, a mixed race community that was systematically just eradicated, mainly because they were considered to be, this is full swing eugenics. They were considered to be, just problematic people. They didn't have the right skin color, whatever. They went so far as to say that they lived in weird tunnels instead of houses, and had horns growing on their heads. And I can't help but read that entire story and think to myself, is this like the basis for Lovecraft's Shadow over Innsmouth? Because at the end of Shadow over Innsmouth, the U.S. military is called in and they fucking just like destroy the town. Like, they shell the town and then they drop depth charges into the reef off the coast. And if I'm not mistaken, they send whatever survivors who have the quote Innsmouth look to basically concentration camps. It's truly like, I think about that all the time now. I can't stop thinking about that story, like the real life story, and Shadow of Innsmouth as sort of like a weird companion, perhaps that being an inspiration for it.
Yeah.
It's truly something that is astounding. And just casual eugenics throughout the 40s and 50s. Like, people don't know that there was like these fittest family competitions, as well as Mr. and Miss 4-H, where sort of the idea that you could breed, like the idea that you could produce beneficial strains of, like livestock, was taken to its extreme conclusion, where you then apply that same logic to human beings. And you go, well, Mr. and Ms. 4-H are the best genetic stock. And you're like, what the fuck? It's just amazing.
So let's talk about changing it, alternate ways to change it, because to me, just pretending it's not there, that's not satisfying to me. That's not satisfactory. Now, one thing you brought up in a previous discussion is, while watching Star Trek, while watching a lot of these stories, so often there's a story about a strange alien creature that sneaks onto a human spaceship or a human research lab and fucks everything up. And that's always the invader. It's this external thing that comes into a normal, quote unquote, human environment and ruins things, and not an Earth pest sneaks off the human spaceship and fucks up an alien ecosystem. Like, imagine if Data in The Next Generation, his cat Spot, got onto an alien planet and just wrecked the local songbird population.
Right. I mean, or like, do we, like, honestly, I lived on a Navy ship. This is not sterile conditions. How do we think that we'll have like completely sterile sort of?
Right, you got roaches and rats and shit.
Yeah.
There's a reason you have a shit's a ship's cat, and that's because you have rats all over the fucking place.
Yeah. So I mean, whatever. If spacefaring were to become normal, then also space pests on ships would become normal, and that's not even counting, like, for instance, like, okay, so you're just gonna beam aboard a planet? That's a little rude.
Yeah.
You didn't even go through their, like, after 2020. We should be rethinking this. You don't have a quarantine.
Yeah, there's no quarantine thing. You should be you should be in a little booth for 2 weeks or something.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
Sanitize your hands, wear a mask. No, they're just right out there, barefaced.
Yeah, I mean, just beam aboard. Fuck it, we got the technology to do this. Yeah, the idea of diseases and whatnot is completely. I mean, it does work to a certain extent. The disease aspect, at least, like, just regular flus and whatnot, is usually not dispensed with because it's the quote future.
It's the future. It doesn't exist. Okay, fine. But we have bacteria in our bodies, and most of it's like benign or even beneficial to us. That doesn't mean it would be benign or beneficial to an alien environment. Just the various bacteria colonies that help us digest food, like that might be a huge problem for an alien environment. You don't know. Fucking Picard might take a dump in an alien toilet and like just wreak havoc on their fucking water supply as his weird human fecal bacteria just like corrupt the entire water system. You don't know.
Yeah, God, could you imagine, like, Picard dropping a deuce just causes an interplanetary incident?
Curiously, Ray Bradbury, who was not leftist or liberal really, had this framing in the Martian Chronicles. Earth ruins Martian civilization by unknowingly passing on the chickenpox.
Yeah. I mean,
he was capable of saying, "Are we the bad guys?" in a way that I think a lot of contemporary, even very liberal, we love identity politics, we love diversity in our fiction writers aren't. Because I think there's this idea like, well, if I'm a diverse avatar of the empire, then it's okay. Like, yeah, I'm still a soldier for the United States, but like I'm queer.
I'm just gonna be point.
So, like, no, you can still enforce the empire's evil even if you're queer. I think that was a big part of the point of Isabel Fall's story, and that's part of why so many people got mad, because it really made them question. It makes you question your own role in imperialism in a way that feels very uncomfortable.
Honestly, and this is probably not my lane to talk about at length, but when the trans ban to the military was floated out as something that Trump wanted to do, honestly, me having been in the military, I was very conflicted, because honestly, no one should be in the military.
Right.
And, I understood it at the last that it was, that it's more of a rights thing than anything else. But honestly, like, yeah, no one should be in the military. Like,
right.
The military will fuck you up, man. It's just gonna, like, if you have any anxiety or any self-worth issues, imagine going into an organization that tells you that you're a piece of shit because you were 2 minutes late.
Yeah.
Imagine that you are in an organization that tells you that, no, you cannot actually do your job because, the thing is, you didn't fold your socks in the correct manner. Your sock folding was 2 millimeters off the norm. So yeah, this is the type of thing you're signing up for.
Right.
Not to mention the fact that I just, like, the other day, like, this old memory bubbled up, and I wonder if it's still happening, where on the ship, every aircraft carrier has like a contingent of Marines. And I remember listening in on more than one occasion to some Marine that was talking about, like, yeah, I was put on fasting punishment or whatever. I forget the exact frame, but he was getting his supplements every day. So basically, they're taking vitamins but being starved.
Wow.
Yes, I don't know if that's still happening, and I honestly want to find out. I think I know a couple people who I might ask that question of, who were recently in the military, in the Marines, I should say. But that's the type of fucked up shit you were talking about. No one should be in the military, especially the U.S. one.
You need to eat food.
Well, I mean, and think of it. That is the way to sort of basically abuse someone that you want to do something with withholding of food. Like that's you train a dog that way to a certain extent,
It's a technique of cults, too, to keep people malnourished or at least give them very little protein so that they're kind of more malleable.
Yeah. I mean, once you're hungry,
Because you're tired, you kind of don't really have the strength to resist or question much. You just sort of go along with whatever.
we had talked about this and you were like completely shocked. Speaking of sort of like diseases and how they're used for imperialism purposes, the fact that when I was in university taking a history class, a Puerto Rican history class, the professor told us that he wasn't trying to be like, he was actually trying to be, what do you call it? Conciliatory. He was saying that like initially when the U.S. came to the island and after the invasion, they thought Puerto Ricans were just lazy and awful people that didn't want to work. And this is supported by the documentation of the time. But he said, but no, the thing is that there is some scholarship about how what had happened wasn't that they were lazy, it's that they had a disease. They got like some sort of hookworm that gave them sort of like lassitude, and they just didn't have the energy. And you're like, wait, how's this better?
They don't want to harvest sugarcane 16 hours a day under the hot sun for like 30 cents a day. Like, probably because of hookworm. I can see no other explanation.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where you're like going like, how's this explanation better?
No, they're just diseased. They can't help it. Their skulls aren't shaped right. That's why. It's the same bullshit.
Right. I mean, this is using a scientific explanation to sort of paper over what is an actual problem, like of colonization. That like, okay, so you want to extract wealth by just basically forcing Puerto Ricans into sweatshops. But somehow they don't want to do that. Well, obviously they have a disease.
It makes me think too of stuff like feminine hysteria. I was like, wow, these women who have like no freedom or rights, like they're not happy for some reason. Probably uterus is fucked up.
Well, it's also like the rest cure, right? From the yellow wallpaper.
Right, where you just psychologically break a woman until she's more compliant. It's like, fix her by basically 2 months of solitary confinement in the dark. Like, goddamn.
It's like, fuck, man.
or an even more extreme example, an antebellum psychologist coined a term. He called his diagnosis drapetomania, which that was his diagnosis for enslaved people who didn't want to be enslaved anymore. And you notice, people were trying to escape because being enslaved is a bad time. He said, it's because of this mental illness called drapetomania. And if you have drapetomania, it means you just want to escape things and you want to avoid hard work. It's like, no, it's just being enslaved is a really bad time, guys. It's not fun. It's not fun.
Yeah. Jesus Christ. I don't even know what to do with that, man.
But yeah, fear of contagion and disease has been colonizer propaganda, despite like the truth being the opposite of the colonizer bringing illness and the colonizer disrupting patterns of cleanliness. Before colonization, Mexico City had a whole canal system that was really brilliant and also like a really great hygiene. Like everybody took a daily bath, and if you were an aristocrat, you had some kind of like access to running water or something, some kind of like simple water system in your home. And if you were poor, there were public baths available to you. So everyone could have a bath. Everyone could have a clean bath. Everyone could have like water for washing and sanitation. And also the canals were used for transportation. It was this really brilliant way of taking advantage of the fact that the city is basically a swamp. It's built on a fucking swamp. And when the Europeans came in, they sort of paved it and tried to turn it into any normal city. And now there's just massive problems with flooding more and more.
Yeah. Well,
because they just tried to ignore the fact that, hey, the city's built on a swamp. Let's put the water somewhere. It's like, no, we'll conquer water. How's that going for you, dumb shit?
Well, that's sort of like the idea that the ancient Mayans, like their cities out in the jungles and whatnot, were just like there was no rhyme or reason to how they just built anywhere. It's just sort of like whatever. And it wasn't until rather recently that they found out that they weren't going by like this sort of Western idea of a grid system.
Right.
They would have these streets that would take a specific path so that when you walked it at a certain time of evening or whatever, the X star was like lighting the way or something to that effect.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. It's something that sort of really demonstrates there a connection to the natural world that is not necessarily a complete domination of it. But you know what, Raquel? This has all been an elaborate trap. I've got you now. We're talking about the Aztecs and the Mayans, but those were empires too.
Oh no.
Bwahaha, got you too. Canceled.
Canceled.
This entire episode's now canceled.
Cancel the Mayans. Cancel. The conquistadors successfully canceled the Mayans.
Well, they did.
Deplatformed them very thoroughly.
Amongst many others. Yeah, so yeah, I do think that speaking of contagion and like especially this resurgence of zombie narratives, which I've only ever sort of almost intuitively, I don't like them very much,
I feel like they've become this. They really missed the idea of what George Romero was getting at, which is that human, we're the real monsters, and human civilization is so fragile. But they've turned them into this reactionary fantasy for like the guy who has a bug out kit and collects guns in his Midwestern suburb, where it's like, well, if society collapsed, I'd be fucking cool. Me and my dozens of guns, I'd get laid so much. I'd finally get laid.
Yeah, I mean, it never examines the whole idea that amongst a suite of different sort of supposed dangers that the capital O other has, it's the idea of contagion or disease. And sort of intuitively, I always viewed sort of zombie narratives as sort of like underclass, the fear of an underclass uprising, or immigrants, or both, because we can be intersectional.
And what's so interesting is that it's so far away from the original concept of zombies, which was slavery. Basically, it's some kind of magical, some kind of witch doctor taking away your free will and turning you into this like zombie slave. One of the earlier zombie movies, like White Zombie, which it's not a woke movie, obviously. It was made in the 1930s, but that's what the zombie is there. It's in having your will and your mind stolen from you. And there's a scene where some kind of like evil witch guy has some kind of plantation staffed by zombies. And that ties in to colonialism so well. That's so much about the horrors of colonialism, because what the fuck else were the colonizers trying to do, the indigenous people, but turn them into fucking zombies? If America could turn all the Puerto Ricans into zombies, and they fucking would. They'd love to do that shit. And it's something that's kind of interesting is at the end of Shaun of the Dead, the happy ending is basically that. They've got zombies working as like
just menial
shopping cart return guys.
Yeah, like menial labor type stuff.
Yeah, and like checkout counter girls. Like they've got the zombies doing that, and that's considered like a happy ending because they're integrated into society. And it's like this idea was the source of horror with where we started, and now we're seeing it as a comfort.
Yeah. Did you ever see The Serpent in the Rainbow?
No.
I haven't rewatched in a while, but I found that it sort of misses an opportunity, because I always felt like, especially the resurgence of sort of zombie narratives in the area at the time, always smacked, to me at least, of like poor insurgents being tortured so badly by like the Papa and Baby Doc regimes that they're just completely sort of catatonic, just like wandering the street. I think they try to sort of touch upon it, but it's not really examined that closely, because of course it's a movie made by an American studio. You don't want to piss off anyone at the studio because you implicate the U.S. in what's going on in Haiti.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know what to say, man.
Yeah.
The zombie one is, the original zombie story is really, there's a lot there. I do think that it's really interesting that Shaun of the Dead does that, but it does it in a cutesy way that I don't know if it works entirely as sort of a critique, because we're supposed to feel a little bit of warm-heartedness because he's got his best friend who's been zombified,
chained in the shed
to game with him.
Just playing video.
Christ. That's fucking bleak.
You're not really supposed to think about it too hard, which is fine. I mean, it's a comedy. You're not supposed to think about it that hard, but I do find it like striking that's the essence of what it was always about. But now we're presenting that as like, and that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yay.
Look, Raquel, zombies are actually, you're trying to, sort of talk about, it's a special type of neurodivergent type of person. You can't just, do that.
Right. Right.
It's like, what?
All right. So we've been talking for a while, so why don't we bring it to a close? Final thoughts?
Go read horror, folks. It is fun.
Yeah, horror's good.
Even if it's not your thing, there's a broad selection of different things that fall under the umbrella of horror. Not everything is splatterpunk.
Horror is good and subversive, and if you're worried about horror being colonialist, read some fucking horror translated from another country. Come on.
We did an entire episode on Horacio Quiroga recently. Go read his stuff. All of that is horror, more or less.
Right. What's that book? It's like Gay Mexican Dracula. Yeah,
It's the root of ice and salt, is it?
something like that.
That's Silvio. Yeah, I think it's called that. I could be wrong. Let me see here.
It's about like a sailor on the ship of death that carried Dracula over.
Yeah, the Demeter.
Yeah. That sounds pretty good. It's like it was sort of a famous Mexican novel, but it just recently got an English translation, and you might want to check that out. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, Silvio Moreno Garcia actually ran a GoFundMe to get that translated. It is in fact called The Route of Ice and Salt. So it does sort of detail like the entire sort of like the amazing sequence of the Demeter leaving Transylvania, whatever port was nearest Transylvania, and reaching London as like a ghost ship, which could have been a novel in and of itself, but
Oh yeah.
but Bram Stoker only had so many pages, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than that, yeah. Also, Silvio Moreno Garcia has this it's a sci-fi story rather than a horror story, but it really hits upon some of the stuff we've been talking about regarding sort of colonialism and the difference between actual resistance, hashtag resistance, and just regular people. I believe it's called a short story called "Them Ships," which is sort of like a modernized retelling of the story of the Malinche,
Ooh.
who is, speaking of the Aztec, she is credited with being the indigenous woman who helped translate for Hernan Cortés.
Right.
And it's really interesting. I haven't, like, every once in a while that memory of reading that story bubbles up. It's also in podcast format at Escape Pod, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool. Okay, so let us wrap it up. Where can our listeners find your work?
I podcast rather regularly over at patreon.com/podsidepicnic. I also have a forthcoming article that will be showing up in Blood Knife, which is a review of The Goblin Emperor.
I'm looking forward to it.
From a sort of more of a leftist perspective. I mean, and my website is alineofinc.com. So I also have most of my writing linked up there, so you can access it.
Great. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
And
this was great.
Yeah, and thank you, audience, for listening. That's all for this episode. If you like what you heard, sign up for our Patreon. Subscribers get early access, monthly bonus book club episodes, and an invitation to the Kitty Sneezes Discord, where we have group writing sessions and talk about culture.
This has been Rite Good with Raquel S. Benedict. Hosted by Raquel S. Benedict and produced by Matt Keeley for KS Media LLC. Edited by Sid Oosley. Theme song by Surgeryhead. This has been a Kitty Sneezes production. For comments and concerns, please write to us at writegud@kittysneezes.com. That is RITEGUD @kittysneezes.com. If you'd like to support us, please visit our Patreon at patreon.com/writegood.
kittysneezes.com in color.